Bo Nix is officially QB1 for the Denver Broncos. Sean Payton made the announcement following Wednesday's practice. We'll tell you how the Broncos made franchise history and why they made the right decision in starting Nix. You're going to get that and much more on today's brand new episode, Locked On Broncos.
You are Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's happening, Broncos Country? Welcome into another episode of Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm Cody Roark, Broncos reporter for Mile High Sports, joined as always by Sayre Bedinger, site expert, predominantlyorange.com. The Broncos, they have named their starting quarterback for the 2024 NFL season, and it is Bo Nix. We'll tell you why we believe the Broncos made the right decision, and on top of that, how they're making franchise history in the process. You'll get that here on today's episode of the show. And on top of that, what does this mean for players like Zach Wilson, Jarrett Stidham, as this announcement has now come forth as the Broncos now focus on the rookie quarterback under center. You get that and much more here on today's episode of Locked On Broncos, which is brought to you by our friends over there at the Game Time app. Make sure you check it out here today. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. And special shout out to all the everydayers and first listeners out there in Broncos country. Certainly for them, Sayre, this is an exciting moment in franchise history, but only even as well for this fan base with Bo Nix being named the starter, something that you and I have talked about for quite some time. This is the expectation. He went out and he did it, but Sean Payton seemed like all things wanted to make Nix earn the job, which he did.
He did earn the job, and they made the right call making him the starter based on what we've seen, right? For those that maybe haven't watched all the preseason reps or haven't been out at training camp like you, Cody, I think to catch everybody up, he has been great all offseason from OTAs through the preseason. We've seen the proof during the preseason, and you even see, I think one of the telltale signs of somebody that's good at what they're doing is when people who don't care about the Broncos are now saying like, man, looks like the Broncos got themselves a quarterback. And we've seen it from, as random as people like Dez Bryant, the former Cowboys receiver, to former Broncos players. And so it's really cool to see this happening. Cody, we talked about it all offseason. When were the Broncos going to go from point A, drafting Bo Nix, to then point B, naming him the starter? Because we kind of figured this would eventually happen. You hoped it would happen before week one. It was always the right call to do it before week one. Now we get it before even week 3 of the preseason. I think this is a great move by Sean Payton to get your guys kind of acclimated with a couple weeks before the regular season. Everybody kind of already knew, and he alluded to that in his press availability, right? He's like, you can kind of sense, I guess, in the locker room that everybody knew this was eventually coming, but this is Bo Nix's team now, and he has a chance, number one in a lot of categories among rookie quarterbacks so far in the preseason. He's been outstanding. Great move by the Broncos, and obviously a great decision to go ahead and draft this guy in the first place, despite a lot of public opposition to that move.
Yeah, look, I was doing a TV interview after practice here locally in Denver, and we're talking about Bo Nix. Alex Singleton walks by and he goes, "I've known for 3 months." So, that's where the locker room is at. And look, there's just a genuine excitement, I'd say, inside that locker room. I said it after the post-game show, talking to players in the locker room. They're like, we got a quarterback. And I think there's that excitement inside the locker room. Certainly those guys see it every day. But let's dive a little bit deeper into why did Bo Nix earn this job? How did he do it? Sayre, I think it's evident, after attending every practice and training camp, watching Bo pick up Sean's offense. Look, and it goes back to that post, draft meeting, and then on the workout that they had at, 8 o'clock in the morning, where Sean saw him throw and said, okay, wow, like, hey, this is it. We're not the only guys who see this. And then when he was talking to George Payton about that, but Bo went out there in every practice, and look, there were days where I wouldn't say like his struggles weren't necessarily like bad things, right? Like, it's like, oh, he could have been better at this. But for the most part, like, Bo stood out on a consistency standpoint from how he commanded the offense, right? Getting the play. And that's still a work in progress. It is going to be for this team, just regardless of who's the quarterback. Sean Payton wants tempo, and I think Bo's done a really good job of picking that up. But just even Bo's knowledge of the offense, and sometimes even Sean said this in his presser, the one thing that kind of stands out about Bo is he's got a quick trigger, and sometimes it's too quick to the point where like, hey, we like this about you, but maybe like give him a second or half second longer to motion on this player or to get set. So there are a lot of things about Bo and the way that he's performed, obviously in the preseason, really in training camp, but his knowledge of the offense, his command of it, and also getting other guys involved, I think have bought him a lot of favor. He has outright won this job. And I think those are the reasons why we've seen it demonstrating these first 2 preseason games, why this was the right decision ultimately for Sean Payton and the Broncos.
And not only the right decision, but a historic decision. I mean, when you look at the history of the Denver Broncos, having a rookie quarterback start week 1 is bordering on unprecedented for a lot of fans. Like, I was born in 1989, Cody. I didn't grow up from the origin stages of John Elway, who is the other most recent rookie quarterback to start week 1 for the Denver Broncos. Bo Nix will be the first to do it since John Elway in 1983. And of course, because of the technicality that John wasn't drafted by the Denver Broncos, Bo is going to be the first round quarterback in Broncos history to start a week 1 game in Denver. And I don't know how long it's been since that, before John Elway, obviously. So it's really exciting all around for the history of this franchise, Cody. It's been a retread, I guess, couple of decades in Denver, which hasn't been all bad, right? The Peyton Manning era, we remember it fondly. Jake Plummer, beloved by Broncos country. Obviously, the Russell Wilson era didn't work out the way that everybody hoped, but man, you look at the history of this team, it's just not really been full of guys the Broncos have drafted at quarterback. So they're certainly not the Green Bay Packers in that regard. So I think when you talk about Bo Nix and this historic moment for the team, it's not only the first for Broncos history, but also Sean Payton has never had a first round quarterback of his own that he drafted starting for him. So really exciting news. I mean, when you look at the history of the organization, the new generations of this fan base, right? We got the new uniforms, brand new franchise quarterback, potentially somebody that's drafted by the team who's only ever played for the Broncos, right? So it's really cool, and it just feels momentous in terms of this franchise history and what it means for the fan base.
Well, and it seems like Sean Payton has had a process all along. He stuck to it. He didn't want to rush the quarterback decision. And look, I know that, I've even said this as well. I said, like, well, it's not really competition. It was a competition because Zach and Jarrett went out there and obviously took their lumps and obviously got their opportunities to run with the first team there to just showcase it. Like, you don't want to just give it to somebody. I know the Chicago Bears did that. The Broncos not taking that approach. Bo has earned that. His teammates inside that locker room feel that as well. So that is big. And look, you touched on the history. I think we should dive a little bit deeper into that history, how it can become even more historic for the Broncos. What is it that Bo Nix can maybe do as a rookie that will make it a little bit more historic here for this franchise and Broncos country? You're going to get that here on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. Broncos country, today's episode of the show is brought to you by our friends over there at FanDuel Sportsbook. And as you all know, FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook. And you've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel lately. Well, we have something a little bit different for you. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers, they can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out of market game. And all you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel at any time. FanDuel also has lines for this weekend's games where the Broncos are currently 3.5-point home favorites in the preseason finale against the Arizona Cardinals. You can get in on the action over on FanDuel Sportsbook. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to download America's #1 sportsbook.
The pressure is on for Bo Nix being the first round quarterback in Broncos history to start week 1 for the team and the first rookie since John Elway in 1983. We're going to talk about that pressure that's now on Bo Nix as the QB1 of the Denver Broncos officially. Sean Payton announced after practice on Wednesday. We're going to break it down on today's episode, Locked On Broncos, but want to say thank you to all of you that make Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day every single day. And if you haven't already, Cody and I, your boys here, we appreciate it if you subscribe wherever you get your podcasts or on YouTube if you haven't done so already. We got a growing channel and community over there as well. And for your second listen of the day, check out Locked On NFL for all the goings on of this offseason. And as we approach now the regular season, only one preseason game left. Cody, I touched on it and spoiled it a bit here in the first segment. I'm just so excited about the historic ramifications of Bo Nix being the franchise quarterback potentially. I mean, like I said, in my lifetime, the most excited probably of drafted quarterbacks would have to be Jay Cutler and Tim Tebow, honestly, because I love Tim Tebow at Florida, and that was a fun draft pick. But this has a different feel to it, and there's certainly going to be a lot of pressure on Bo Nix, being that he's starting week 1. The other guys throughout Broncos history, they didn't get to do that.
Yeah, and look, I think that is in and of itself the pressure. I asked Sean Payton after practice, really just about the pressure quarterbacks have in general, and he said, "Hey, even if you're not a rookie, Peyton Manning felt this, Drew Brees, like some of these other quarterbacks that have started in the NFL, historic guys, they've faced the pressure of, hey, you're going out there, and the optics of the position means that you have all the pressure on your shoulders, essentially, especially I think in media and the fan base. Like everything that the quarterback does is either magnified or it's blown up in a lot of different ways to where it's like, we're going to nitpick that little detail. Like, for example, the stuff I already see about Bo Nix, about his average depth of target. I can't stand those nerdy numbers, because if you go through and you actually watch Bo Nix, what is he doing? And this is something that Sean highlighted. And this is how I think Bo Nix can carry that over into the regular season to make his first start or his first season as a rookie as the starter a little more historic for the franchise. He's moving the ball down the field, at least in the preseason, and he's having scoring drives. That's what Sean mentioned after practice. The ultimate metric of how you measure a quarterback isn't necessarily by the amount of touchdowns that you throw. It's, okay, hey, the offense, when he's in, it's moving the ball downfield. They're not finding themselves backwards of the chains consistently the way that this offense has in quite some time. Bo has those traits to him about his quick processing, the quick trigger that he has to get the ball out of his hands quickly, and the ability to improvise while making the smart decision. This is something that is uncharted territory here for the Broncos. And to your point as well, you mentioned it, like for a guy like Sean Payton, he's never drafted a rookie quarterback in the first round and has started him week 1. So this is uncharted territory for him as well. So ultimately, that means there's going to be a lot of scrutiny. There's going to be a lot of pressure that naturally comes with it. It doesn't seem like this is something that phases Bo Nix or Sean Payton in the slightest.
It really doesn't. And I love that about those guys. Just that, I mean, Sean kind of even said it in the lead up to the NFL draft. Like they feel like they can evaluate the quarterback position better than other teams. And he was just upfront and honest about that. And I love that. And I think you've seen that calm demeanor translate into just that quiet confidence throughout the course of the offseason with trusting the process. And now Bo kind of dominating every statistical category. I know it's 2 preseason games. I know it's only a handful of possessions, but I mean, he's number 1 or 2 in all of them. So that's significant to me. And I think when you talk about the historic significance of this, Cody, think about the fact that all the other first round quarterbacks or high draft picks at quarterbacks in recent Broncos history have not had any continuity on the coaching staff. Like Bo Nix may actually get that. Let's go back. Jay Cutler, Mike Shanahan was fired after his 3rd NFL season, only his 2nd year after, as of being a full-time starter with the team. Tim Tebow never got to see the vision that Josh McDaniels had for him. Not that we really wanted to see any more of Josh McDaniels, but remember, it was McDaniels who drafted him. We never saw that vision unfold in that regard. I guess Brock Osweiler never started for Gary Kubiak that I remember. So other than, spot starts and things like that.
He didn't like Paxton Lynch either.
He didn't like Paxton Lynch, and Paxton had changing coordinators as well. And I mean, I know Brock Osweiler started in the 2015 season. I'm talking about as his like QB1. You guys get what I'm saying, right? So Drew Lock, changing coordinators all the time. So Sean Payton and Bo Nix, that stability there, I think is a real source of the optimism that I personally feel towards this. And maybe you can speak to that as well, Cody, and how you feel about that, because to me, having a coach that is fully bought in to the quarterback is also foreign. Like you said, Kubiak didn't want Paxton Lynch. Vic Fangio certainly didn't want Drew Lock. And you could go back further and further. McDaniels and the coach that replaced him, John Fox, he didn't want Tebow out there. So you have a quarterback and a coach who both want to be there. And they, Sean Payton actually wants Bo Nix in his lineup.
Well, and you're also getting a little bit of that brain trust that came over initially. Like Pete Carmichael came over with Sean Payton 2006 to the New Orleans Saints, right? And was there for that historic run when Drew Brees got traded there. And look, they had that magical turnaround there. But you have continuity in terms of your coaching staff. Now, the thing that could change eventually here, Davis Webb could get plucked off by some NFL team to be an offensive coordinator next year. Certainly, he's a guy whose name is rising amongst the coaching ranks. But you have stability, as you mentioned, in the coaching staff, which this is also historic. It seems like the first time in forever because there has been that revolving door. You're not getting that here with this quarterback room, with this young offensive roster. And look, all of a sudden, the questions we had this offseason about the direction of this team with, oh my gosh, like Cortland Sutton wants out of the Denver Broncos. What's he posting on social media? To now, it's like Cortland wants to be part of what Denver has to offer here. And Bo Nix is a very, very exciting proponent of that. And, having talked to guys in the locker room, they're excited about what Bo can bring to the table offensively. Defensive guys are sitting there on the sideline during these games saying, man, he's moving the ball downfield. We've had a nice little break where, we don't feel like we have to go right back onto the field. Like that has been the trend the last however many handful of years, 4, 5, 6 years in a row where the Broncos defense, it's like, hey, the defense has had to carry the water for the offense. Now it seems like the Broncos are at a point with Bo Nix here as a starter in his rookie season where he's going to get every opportunity to make, to experience the highest of highs, the lowest of the lows, where fans need to let him make the mistakes in the process. Because if there's anything that I've seen from Bo that makes me feel like this could be a historic jump here for the franchise, it is the fact that Bo, if he makes a mistake once, it's rare he makes that mistake twice. It's rare he ever goes back and does something schematically. Like the biggest critique in week 1 was, well, he threw off of his back foot, or he ran like he was throwing while moving a little bit too much, whereas he just needs to stand there and set his feet. He set his feet quite a bit against the Green Bay Packers. He also did that in joint training camp practices, which, the people in the arguments have been saying, well, he did it against the second string defense. It's not about who you play. It's about how you play. And Bo is doing things from an operational standpoint that have led to preseason success. If you can continue to do those things where the Broncos believe defensively they've improved against the run. Sean said kind of their run game right now, it says it's all still a work in progress. That's going to be the next metric. And if the defense can play the way that we've seen them play so far in the preseason and the run game can get going, the Broncos, I think, will win more than the people have them expected. They won 8 last year. I think they could win 10 games this season if all plays out the way that we maybe expect it to here with Bo under center, what he can do. And if the Broncos offense takes a jump in a couple of areas, this is going to be a better team here. And Bo has a chance here not only to be in the historic window he's in of being the first rookie quarterback to start since John Elway, and really the first rookie to be drafted by the Broncos to start week 1. Bo has a chance to lead the Broncos to a winning season for the first time in forever, which that right there will be historic in and of itself. But there are also some other ripple effects that come with this announcement, Sayre. What is going on with Jarrett Stidham? What's going on with Zach Wilson? How does this decision specifically impact those guys? And does it open up the door for maybe 3 quarterbacks on the roster? Sayre and I will debate and tell you why we think it may happen or why it may not here on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. Broncos Country, today's episode of the show is also brought to you by our friends over there at the Game Time app. At Game Time, they have a brand new feature that's called Game Time Picks. That makes getting tickets for your favorite live events or sporting events even easier because Game Time Picks, they filter out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats so that you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. That's what you can get inside the Game Time app, especially if you want to go check out this weekend's home preseason finale as the Denver Broncos host the Arizona Cardinals, where you're not going to see Bo Nix starting. We're going to see a lot of Jarrett Stidham and Zach Wilson as the Broncos try to figure out what the backup quarterback situation behind Nix will be this season. Plus, you get to see the Broncos at home one more time before they start off the season against the Seattle Seahawks in week 1. If you're going to that game, Game Time also has access to tickets there. The thing I like about it, the all-in pricing where you toggle that feature, it'll show you your total up front. That way, you're not blindsided by any surprise fees at checkout. Plus, you get seat views where you get a panoramic view of your seat in the app before you even buy it. So check it out with the Game Time app today. Take the guesswork out of buying concert tickets or sporting event tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. As we jump in the fourth quarter action on today's episode of Locked On Broncos, we'll analyze the quarterback decisions that are now coming up between Jarrett Stidham and Zach Wilson. There could be some credence that both of these guys will be on the active roster here for Sean this upcoming season. We'll tell you about the impact of that and maybe how it's a good thing here for a guy like Bo Nix on today's episode of the show. Real quick, want to say thanks to all the everydayers, first listeners out there for tuning in and making us a part of your day every single day. Make sure if you haven't done so already, subscribe or follow so you get daily Denver Broncos news, content, coverage, and more. You get that here. Locked On Broncos, your team every day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. So where do we go from here, Sayre? I think that the moment that it was announced that Bo was going to be the starter, I think a lot of people, their next thought was, okay, who's going to be Bo's backup? If you listen to Sean Payton talk today at his press conference, I kind of got the vibe that there's a really strong chance that both Zach Wilson and Jarrett Stidham could be on this roster because he highlighted things that both of these guys have brought to the table, to the team, to that position room specifically, and for a young guy like Bo.
Yeah, it sounds to me from listening to Sean Payton like the talent is starting to match the execution when it comes to Zach Wilson. He was highlighting some of the throws that he made in a red zone period today. And obviously we didn't get to see that. You did, Cody, but we didn't get to see, most of us didn't get to see that. And so I think you can speak to that in particular of what Sean was really impressed by. But to me, I agree with you on the idea that Zach could be ascending into that QB2 role. Now, as it pertains to what that would mean for Jarrett Stidham, you have to keep the idea of him being traded open at this point. And to me, I would go, if I'm Sean Payton and George Payton, I'm coming into my personnel meetings, tomorrow or tonight or whatever, whenever they do that. And I would say, look, if we can get X draft pick or draft picks for Jarrett Stidham, like let's do that trade. But if we can't get what we want for him, there's no reason to trade him until before the deadline because, as we know, quarterbacks are the most valuable currency in the NFL at midseason. Imagine a situation like we had last year with the Cleveland Browns or the Minnesota Vikings or the New York Giants, a handful of other teams. You get to midseason, all of a sudden teams are like, hey, what do you want for Jarrett Stidham? Because we could win some games right now, and we're not because our quarterback's hurt or he's playing horribly. You hold on to your quarterbacks until somebody's willing to give you what you want for that guy. I believe the Browns last offseason, Cody, got a fifth or sixth. Somebody can correct me in the comment if I'm wrong, for Josh Dobbs from the Arizona Cardinals. And then he gets traded again. So to me, you do not trade Jarrett Stidham unless you get what you want. Yes, it makes sense to trade him. You could save $6 million, but do not trade him unless you get exactly what you want or you're sending him to a situation where he can start week one.
Well, let's take a look at it too. What does the market currently look like? I think you mentioned, a couple of teams there. Like, for example, you look at the quarterback situation in Minnesota. J.J. McCarthy out for the year with the knee injury. Sam Darnold going to be the QB1. There's various reports there. You can check out Locked On Vikings if you want to know more about that. Just about maybe the overall perception. They've had a rough offseason. Could a guy like Jarrett Stidham come in, especially if Sam Darnold struggles? But to my understanding, too, they also really like Nick Mullins in Minnesota. So does Minnesota make plays? What about the New York Giants, who you never know what you're going to get? Drew Lock right now, former Bronco, dealing with the hip injury. Daniel Jones had some ups and downs, especially against the Houston Texans. What is the situation that makes sense? Because also, here's where the Broncos are at, too. Denver also wants to do right by some players. And look, they love Jarrett Stidham. Part of me thinks unless it's the right opportunity for Jarrett to go in and contribute right away and Denver can get something out of it, I don't see any movement on that side necessarily happening. Now, that could change. Obviously, this week in the final week of the preseason, I think the expectation is we will see Jarrett Stidham in the first half, Zach Wilson all of the second half. My own personal preference here would be to rotate them every offensive series. That's my own personal preference. It's probably not going to be the popular one, but if you want to see these guys, I think you have to see them with the different units, simultaneously. And this is going to extend throughout the entire game. I know it doesn't make a lot of sense from like a flow things and like a rhythm, but you have to be able to see if you are truly trying to figure out, if you're Sean Payton, trying to make this decision to move on from one of these guys or to keep both of them, you need to see them play with the second and third team offenses respectively. You can't get that in this final preseason game unless you do the every series approach, which at this point, Bo Nix not going to play. Why not?
Right. I agree with you. I think you do that kind of stuff in practice, right? I mean, that's kind of what they're used to at this point. I know it's not the same when you're in a game, but at the same time, to get evaluation, to get stuff out there on film, it does make a lot of sense. And people that are listening may be wondering, like, well, why are you guys talking about trading Jarrett Stidham if Zach Wilson's having such a great offseason? Like, he doesn't even cost as much. He's, got a more of a history of making mistakes. Like, Stidham already knows the offense better. Well, the reason why you trade Stidham instead of Zach Wilson, other than the fact that I think maybe more NFL teams would be high on Stidham at this point, $6 million in cap savings if you trade Stidham versus about 2.75 roughly if you trade Zach Wilson. Plus, Zach has more starting experience in the NFL. Just quite frankly, I mean that experience would lead me to believe that like he's capable, fully capable. Although some people don't seem to think so. He's fully capable of being a quarterback too from week 1 of the season to the end of the year. Let's say Bo does, knock on wood, have an injury. Zach has been in that situation multiple times already. So he's prepared for that kind of stuff. And so that's why you would trade Stidham, also because of the fact that Stidham would have a chance to make more money elsewhere in the league if the Broncos would send him. Let's say they trade him to the New York Giants tonight, right? They trade him to the New York Giants. I think he's better than Daniel Jones. I think he's better than Drew Lock. I think he starts for that team right away and could have a chance to parlay that into more money down the line. He doesn't have that opportunity in Denver aside from an injury to Bo Nix and potentially even Zach Wilson, depending on how the depth chart, fills out. So that's why I think you would be doing right, like you said, doing right by the player to potentially trade Stidham right now to a good situation, not just to any situation, but to a good situation to allow him to thrive and potentially make some money as he hits free agency in 2025.
Well, maybe even throw a little wild card. This might be a little bit of a reach, but maybe even look at trading him to the Pittsburgh Steelers. That might be a better situation for them than what they got. Because I know, look, it's an up and down battle. You look at the reports coming out of there, and obviously Chris Carter of Locked On Steelers. Look, Broncos country, you want to know what's going on with Pittsburgh, especially as that week 2 game will approach in the regular season. It could be Justin Fields as the starter. Kind of all signs seem to indicate that. But also, like, there's concerns that neither of those quarterbacks are good enough for what they want to achieve down there. So could you maybe do that? I feel like you wouldn't want to do that because Jarrett already knows your offensive operation really, really well. That would just be kind of like, I would say, like, you want Jarrett to go out and have a successful situation. I think you put him in Pittsburgh. Yes. New York, I think he can go make some money for himself. Is it going to lead to wins? Probably not, because that is a tough division in and of itself. And I don't think, have a great enough nucleus around Jarrett Stidham there that would amplify some of his strengths and what he's able to do. So what is the situation that is right? The Packers, even if Jarrett's not going to be the starter behind, Jordan Love, he'd be the best backup option that they've had. I know you and I talked about this as well. And I know Peter Bukowski of Locked On Packers was not happy with the quarterback situation behind Jordan Love with Pratt and obviously with Clifford in the preseason. So maybe there is something that we'll continue to, follow and see if anything develops here for the Broncos. If I had to give a prediction today, Sayre, I think both Zach Wilson, Jarrett Stidham somehow stay on this roster. I don't know at what cost to what other position group, but that's my hunch. If you had to give a prediction today, what would it be?
I think I agree with you. I think keeping all 3 of those quarterbacks on the roster should be the message that is being sent right now, because you want to, if nothing else, you want to amplify those guys' value, and they are valuable. Like Jarrett Stidham has talked multiple times about, how this team, I think they did a vacation up to Vail or something like that he mentioned. And he's like, I've never been on a team that does something like this. This team is just so tightly knit. Just keeping that chemistry and having that tight knit group is worth keeping an extra quarterback on the active roster, even if he's not active, because he's in your quarterback room. He's helping you see different stuff. Like Jarrett Stidham will be an asset for the amount the Broncos are paying him, even if he's not playing. And you already have that worked into your budget, so you don't necessarily have to work, around that cap space right now. So I think that's maybe the biggest reasons why you would keep him, aside from just what he brings to the on-field product.
Oh, and look, Broncos country, this thing will kind of play itself out throughout this week. Roster cuts are coming up next week. There are a lot of moving pieces here. Sean Payton didn't want to get into any other position battles or conversations about who's going to start at these other battles. We can make the assumption, I think, based on what we've seen in some of those departments. We'll wait for the official announcement. But Bo Nix is the starting quarterback here for the Broncos. And we've seen comments already. We've seen tweets about the Bo Broncos. We've seen tweets about the Broncos Country, Bo leaving. That right there, there's some excitement around this franchise. And look, if they can find ways to win games, it's going to be fun for you and I. It's going to be fun for the audience because it makes the show so much better when they're having success. And we've been able to connect with fans as this team has been struggling, as they've lost games and they've had really bad seasons. So this would be kind of a really cool full circle moment if it does click here for Bo Nix and the Broncos. But that'll wrap up today's episode of the show, Broncos Country. Tomorrow's episode for all you everydayers out there. The Broncos had some good news with several players like Levi Wallace, Devon Vele returning to practice on Wednesday. Can they stack that going into Thursday? Some of the other positional storylines, we'll have you covered for that on tomorrow's brand new episode of the show. For your second listen of the day, Broncos Country, go check out Locked On NFL for the biggest stories around the National Football League, the local experts. They have you covered there on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Sayre and myself, we'll see you tomorrow for a brand new episode of the show.